And breathe, Scotland fans. There was a period in that game, in particular about 5 minutes into the second half, when I thought, we've seen this before, we have seen this game before, and it doesn't always play out too well from a Scottish point of view, but they got through it. They have their first win on the board in this Six Nations. They are up and running. Welcome back to the channel. Scotland-Italy has just finished. I can see the post-match interviews on the TV here playing out. Final whistle has just gone. Give me your thoughts on the game. From a Scotland and an Italian point of view, what did you make of the match as a whole, which I'll get into, and kind of where it leaves these teams heading into the Six Nations? I'll go through all of that. But as I say, there was a real period there where I was like, this feels eerily familiar. Because the first half, I didn't think Italy were all that great in the first half, but they got to half-time and it was 10-point game, only down by 10 points, and I thought, I don't know if that should be more from a Scotland point of view. Then we had the start to the second half, the penalty, the intercept try, locked at 19 all, and you were thinking, this could go either way here. They have given the Italians hope. So fair play to Scotland for getting their way through it, for getting the bonus point as well. Because I suppose from a Scotland point of view, if we start with the victors, that's probably the top line of all of this, is it wasn't perfect, there's plenty to work on, there was some really good stuff as well, but they have the win. Next week, huge for them. Home against Ireland, that is an absolutely massive game for the Scots. They had to get through this one, and they've ultimately done that. There'll be a few things they're not happy with, but there'll be a lot that they are as well. And I jotted a few things down. I mean, I think in that first half, two of the first three tries they scored was when they took the gamble and went to the corner, and it paid off. Later in the game, it actually didn't pay off, and that was part of the period of the match where I was thinking, oh yeah, they needed to start taking the points. This could end up getting away from them. It didn't get to that. But they took the gamble, they went to the corner, and they were able to execute really, really well in the opening stages, I thought, from a Scottish point of view, raced into a 14-0 lead. And despite what then happened, kind of start of the second half, the game eventually becoming even again, it was such a nice cushion to settle the nerves, to put the Italians under pressure early on. And if we're talking about individual performances, two guys in particular, well, one definitely, but two in particular that I think will come in for a lot of praise following this game is Hugh Jones and Darcy Graham, who we all know are excellent, but underlined it here. I think Hugh Jones, sitting here right now, if we think about the British and Irish Lions, which is part of the subplot of this Six Nations, it always is in Lions year. For me, right now, I would have Hugh Jones as my starting outside centre. I think for quite a while now, he's been excellent. I was a big fan of his when he was playing in the English Premiership, so I saw more of him. Often saw him at fullback, actually. But for Scotland for years, he has been a pretty devastating presence, I think, in their centres. And I thought he was excellent today. Scored the hat-trick, but not just that. He's so much more than just getting that hat-trick in terms of getting over the gain line, his work in defence. I think he is excellent. And Darcy Graham, we all know how good he is. Injuries have been the problem with Darcy Graham, but he gives you an X factor. This might be unfair. I feel he gives Scotland an X factor, which, for example, Duhan van der Merwe doesn't give them. Loads of you might disagree with me there and list off the incredible tries that van der Merwe has scored, in particular against England, actually. But I think Darcy Graham is capable of more game-breaking moments. And when that game was in the balance, when you needed something, when you had Finn Russell, who didn't have a great game, I will speak about the intercept, actually. I think that's important. But when you needed something, Darcy Graham is the sort of player that gives it to you. Awesome to see him back. I hope he stays fit, because he is another player that should be on that plane to Australia, and possibly a starting Lion as well. I thought they were both excellent. And the other thing from a Scotland point of view, I'm going to come on to some of the negatives in just a second, but the only try they conceded was that interception, which goes, Steve Tandy, isn't it, still the defence coach? I think he will be pretty pleased overall to only concede the interception, keeping the Italians out at the end of the game, despite the fact that their discipline actually wasn't that great. They gave Italy opportunities to get into their 22 late on, but they were able to hold them out. I think that's another big plus here from a Scotland point of view. But they do have stuff to work on. I thought their discipline. I think if you look at, with the exception of Wales, maybe England, but I think most other teams in the Six Nations would capitalise on being let back into the game in the way the Italians were. They should have been out of it, and they weren't. And I suppose if you want to turn it into another positive, credit for Scotland for getting themselves back in front. Because as I say, we've seen this script before. We have seen Scotland in games like this before against a team like Italy, that they do start losing their grip on it. It felt like that might be happening, but they got the couple more tries. They got themselves the breathing space and the bonus point, and they got the victory. But against other nations, that won't necessarily be the case. So I think their discipline has to get better. And what is that? Concentration? I don't know. There's something there that you can't give other teams that sort of hope and that sort of opportunity. But Scotland up and running, bonus point win, good on them. Massive game next week, huge game next week. Italy. The first thing I've got written down here is, are we at a point where we judge Italy by more than just a plucky defeat, where there's some positives, they showed good spirit, but they ultimately fall on the wrong side of the result? Which is previously, like previous Italian teams, would look at this result and think, oh, do you know what, fair play to Italy, because they conceded 2 early tries and they got themselves back into it and their scrum was pretty rock solid. And we'd look at the positives, and there are still positives, and I'll stand by those positives. But given what they did last year, 2 wins and 1 draw, given the quality in this team and how I think it is a more all-round Italian team than we've seen previously, do we actually look at it and say they had a really poor first 30 minutes as a whole, I think. They were as good as Scotland were to take those early opportunities and score the tries. I thought Italy were quite poor. I don't think they had the sort of impact on the game they would have wanted. They allowed Scotland to dictate the early stages. And then they got themselves back into the game, but then also Scotland wrestled back control from them when they had them on the back foot. And do you start to look at it and say, to kick on, they need more? That might be being harsh. I don't know. It's just a thought to me that I thought, this isn't just a plucky defeat, if you know what I mean. This is a decent Italian team that got themselves back into the game, and I give them huge credit for that. But once you're at 19 all, do you need to do more? Maybe not. Just a thought. Because I think part of the reason I say that, actually, final point, is they then made mistakes. Like, they got themselves back into the game and then made mistakes. And I just wonder whether those are the small margins that we're talking about here. In terms of the positives, I really like this Italian team. I thought their scrum looked very, very good. I love some of the players in their back line. I thought physically they weren't on it at first, but then some of the shots we saw going in, the work they did at the breakdown, they were a bit of a menace there. I think that is something for teams to look at when they're playing them. They've got quite a few players, don't they? Like Nicotera and Fischetti and various other guys that are pretty good at getting over the ball and stealing it at the breakdown. So Wales is massive. Wales is massive for Italy, isn't it? They're still capable, I think, of picking up results against, in particular England, although they've got to go to Twickenham. We saw them draw against France last year, but you do look at that Wales game and think that is huge for both of those sides. It's the great thing about the Six Nations, right? Like, I'm looking at it from a Scotland point of view. They're up and running. They've got to win. Now they host Ireland. Like, the narratives that you get, depending on the result, are always pretty intriguing. And it's the same with Italy having lost. Is it a wooden spoon decider? Many people expect it to be, not necessarily at this early stage, but it's a big game, a big opportunity for them. What I would say is I think if you look at Wales and Italy's performances over the last, 24 hours, I think there's more in that Italian performance to give them hope than there was in the Welsh one. Even though I liked some of the stuff in the Welsh performance, overall, I think you'd look at the Italians and say they look to be a better team. And actually, final point on this game is I'm really glad it was a good game in the end, because there was a period there where I was worrying, are we about to get another blowout, and the first 2 games of this Six Nations would have all been a bit rubbish, really. But it ended up being a real contest, and fair play to Scotland, which I've just remembered. Before I finish, I wanted to mention Finn Russell. The interception in particular. I didn't think Russell had a great game. It wasn't awful, but I didn't think he had a great game. And in particular in the context of the Lions, I've heard it said previously from the likes of, I think it was Johnny Sexton, I think, that I heard quoted, or someone had had a conversation with him, something similar, where what Finn Russell does brilliantly, very few others can do. But what he does badly can cost you test matches. Is that unfair and reactionary from today? It was just going through my mind, in particular when he threw that interception. And it allowed Italy back into the game. It drew the scores level because they were under the post and the conversion was easy. In the context of the Lions, that came to mind for me. Always interesting. To be continued, I think, the Lions discussion. But that's food for thought for you. Those are my thoughts on the game. You can have your say in the comments section. Also, whilst you're here, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Enjoy the Ireland-England game, that's up next. I'll be doing a video on that one as well. I'll see you in the next one.